Hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast. My guests today are doctors Ayesha and Dean Sherzai, who are a husband and wife neurology team. Together, they co-direct the Alzheimer's prevention program at Loma Linda University, where they study all things brain health with a very specific focus on lifestyle interventions to prevent cognitive decline and neurodegeneration. I think this is an important conversation because chances are you have somebody in your life who's suffering from Alzheimer's. It's a disease that afflicts over 47 million people worldwide right now, and that stat is predicted to triple by 2050. And although there's currently no cure for this disease, the truth is, and this is amazing, 90% of all Alzheimer's cases can be reversed. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because what distinguishes the Sherzais from many of their colleagues is this unique focus that they have on prevention. And they've had tremendous success, significantly reversing cognitive decline and adding vibrant years to many, many of their patients' lives. The Sherzais first graced the podcast a couple of years ago, back in episode 330, to talk about their first book, which is called The Alzheimer's Solution. It's a must-read. You got to pick this thing up. It's amazing. So today they return to bring us up to speed on the latest science on brain health, to discuss their brand new book, which is called The 30-Day Alzheimer's Solution. And of course, to provide you with all the information and the tools and the lifestyle prescriptions that you need to avoid these neurodegenerative diseases that devastatingly afflict far too many people. So this one is super powerful. It's potentially life-changing. But before we dive in, today's episode is brought to you by the Plant Power Meal Planner. Everything, and I mean everything you need to treat your brain and your body correct, and once and for all, dial up your nutrition for 2021. For just $1.90 a week, it serves up unlimited access to thousands of highly customizable, delicious, nutritious, and easy to prepare whole food plant-based recipes updated regularly with built-in automatic grocery delivery, so everything you need just magically shows up at your doorstep. You'll also get access to our team of amazing nutrition coaches ready to answer all your questions 7 days a week, and lots more features. So to learn more and to sign up, visit meals.richroll.com. And literally for the price of a cup of coffee, you can watch your life change. Again, that's meals.richroll.com. Okay, please hit that subscribe button. And without further ado, let's get into all things brain health with doctors Dean and Ayesha Sherzai. What is it about age or maybe neurology that makes people set in their ways as they get older? It is a weird thing, right?
It really is.
It becomes more difficult to entertain new ideas.
Yeah, I think it varies from person to person, but in my experience, it's just comfort. You know, once you set a path and you're comfortable with it, your brain doesn't really allow you to change that path. It's like walking on a snow track. It's so deeply set and the walls are so solid that it's difficult for you to actually make a new path again.
Grooves, right.
And it requires a lot of reflection and judgment and being okay to make mistakes and the discomfort in being uncomfortable, the comfort in being uncomfortable.
Right.
That can help you set new ways. But
yeah,
I don't know what you want to say about
it
that.
does seem like that becomes much more of a challenge.
It does.
Yeah.
The whole idea of change is not normal. I'm talking about chronic change. Acute change, we're good at it because an acute change, we had to for millions of years. There's a tree, there's a lion, I better make change in my decision making. I'm not going to go down this path. Long-term change, we're not designed for that. Our brains are not designed for long-term change. That's a completely different mechanism. And if we don't address that, I mean, to be honest, I know that it's not being recorded. Our political stances, everything is around this concept of being okay with change. I always say about 5% of the population is future seekers. The other 95% is past protectors. And you have to be past protector in many ways because past protection has worked. Whatever has gotten you here is you depending on the past patterns, right? But all the change in society, in the world around us, is by those 5% or whatever, I'm using arbitrary number, that are comfortable, this is weird people, comfortable with change, with the unknown, the 360 degrees of unknown, you're willing to go there? And yet this house that's comfortable, you're willing to leave it to go to the next place. That's an unusual concept, which comes with the frontal lobe. But that's why as we get older, we become more set on all the strings that connects us to the past. You want us to sever to go to a new path that is unknown at a time where I'm already vulnerable?
Yeah.
That's too much risk.
Yeah. Is there a genetic piece to that? When you look at that 5%, can you isolate out what it is that distinguishes them neurologically from
You
their
can tell
peers?
very early. You can tell there's a genetic component and an environmental component. The genetic anxiety is at the core of all this stuff, or a term that is like anxiety. We're using anxiety as a word that's as a filler, but it's a little more than that. Our ability to deal with the world around us, for the most part, at the beginning is genetically. You can see the children. We have 2 children. Both
Trust
of them,
me, we're going to talk about them. But go ahead.
but they're both very precocious,
Yeah.
incredibly, but
That's
very
the understatement of the century.
No.
But go
that's
ahead.
very kind.
very different, though.
Yeah.
Very different. Alex is what you could see when you were, and I'm not putting him down because this is not a weakness. This is just our proclivities. We can change him. When you put him on the sand when he was 6 months old, you saw him do this.
He hated sand.
Sophie would crawl to the ocean. I mean, right away.
Right.
I mean, that's a threat. Why are you not threatened by the very thing you're supposed to be threatened by? No threat. So that threat aversion versus not threat, part of it is intrinsically ingrained in us. Part of it is actually, data shows, part of it is actually programmed. How your mother reacts to anxiety-provoking moments, because the mother's there all the time. Whoever you're around the most, and how they react, how they promote challenging situations, an anxiety-provoking situation, how they react with it, and how they deal with it is forget about leadership masters, I got a PhD in leadership, forget about that. It ends and starts there.
Yeah.
You create situations that are a little bit anxiety-provoking. You fail, nothing. Oh, my parents didn't react badly. You succeed, great. How you react and how those micro environments of threat aversion, threat response, threat creation and response is the foundation of all leadership.
Yeah, I would think from an environmental perspective, or an evolutionary perspective, that maintaining your membership in good standing with your community is paramount, right? So
Yes.
if that community is welcoming to people who push the boundaries and try new things, that's one thing. But if that sort of thinking outside the box is going to alienate you, then there's going to be some pushback, right? There's a disincentive that's butting up against somebody's willingness to entertain new ideas or try new things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Always.
Yeah.
And the culture that's been set in place that creates an aversion to change. The language, the micro languages, anything that somebody brings that is a little threatening to the status quo, you have things that are, this is arrogant. The word arrogant to push away people who have new ideas is universal.
It's such a ubiquitous silencing technique.
Yes.
And when you look at the main reason why people are not willing to change is the fear of being ostracized, like you said.
Right.
Nobody wants to get out of that comfortable zone because it's really difficult to be alone in your way of life, in your new methodology, in your new habits. And that's the first step that people have to challenge themselves to take over.
Right. Given that, though, it's interesting that most environments are not really that permissive when it comes to free thinking and, creative expression. Most are pretty regimented around what's okay and what's not. But it would seem like we should be more encouraging to that permissive environment. And, why is that? Why are we not able to kind of make that more the case as opposed to, the slim 5% or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Well, we met in Afghanistan and with Taliban around us.
Yeah.
Yet that same mentality exists here in the medical community. And by the way, this is me not bashing the medical community.
Right, be careful.
No.
No, we love the medical. We're part of them.
And
You're not comparing the medical community here to the Taliban.
No,
Okay.
no,
not
Let's
at
clear
all.
that up.
just their mentality, that's all. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
No, but the stagnant comfort with the status quo is the same thing. I mean, the hallways of your limbic system are the same. You might have put better clothes and better beards, and my beard was shaven a little better here than that. But if the mentality is, I must maintain, it's not always overt. I must maintain the status. And I don't know even why, but it makes me uncomfortable. It's the same.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2002, before we met, 2 months earlier, I'm at NIH, Experimental Therapeutics Branch. That's as wonky, as experimental as it gets, speaking with Nobel Prize winners. 2 months later, I'm in Afghanistan speaking with Taliban leaders. Both places trying to bring change. And I can promise you, the language was much more sophisticated, but the blockades were the same. Protection of the status quo. That's why, I mean, when we talk about dementia, we talk about stroke, we talk about mental health. Even now, the repetition of the same patterns over and over again, and now some other studies are starting with clinical trial and with 100 people, 50 people, 6 months. We're done. We know it works. We're whole food plant-based.
Right.
But reality is, if you go 20% better than what the standard American diet is, you'll do 20% better in your healthcare. What does that mean? That means in Alzheimer's, that's $80 billion saved per year.
Right. Well, it's been a couple of years since you guys have been on the show, and in that intervening period of time, have you found that the sort of conventional medical community has been a little bit more embracing of you than in years past, given the success that you're having and the results that you're seeing in your patients? Or what does that look like right now?
They have. We are seeing a lot of open-mindedness to the idea that lifestyle works, that it's important, that it should be a part and parcel of the bigger conversation about health and wellness in general. And, everywhere we go to the conferences, medical conferences, and it was always focused on molecular research, which is very important. But lately, there's been a lot of conversation about the importance of community-based research and lifestyle and addressing our environments, which is wonderful. So yes, they are very welcoming, and I'm very encouraged to see that. Still contrived, still not as intensive as it needs to be. I think there's a lot of need for improvement, for better communication. And that's what Dean and I have been working on, reaching out into the communities to see what fits there. Because the cookie cutter model of something that fits, say, for example, 50 to 60-year-old Bostonian white men wouldn't really be applicable in San Bernardino in a Hispanic community, for example. So finding out specifically what is applicable, what works long-term, and what people can accept is the part that we are working on.
Right. So many things I want to get into with you guys. First of all, thank you for coming.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
It's nice to see you guys. I'm delighted that you're here today. We're going to pick things up where we last left off with them a couple of years ago, but I got to get this out of the way first. I got to talk about your kids because I'm obsessed with how accomplished these two young people are. You've got your son, Alex. Is he 15 now?
He's 15.
He's
yes.
in college.
Yes.
Right. Sophia is, how old is she?
13.
13?
Yes.
They've written this book, Walk Like an Elephant, which is all about protecting wild elephants from poachers. But just to give listeners or viewers a sense of what's going on here, Alex mastered calculus at 8, correct?
Yes.
That's
okay.
Right.
He wrote this book. He completed high school at 10 with a SAT in the 90th percentile. He's the youngest person to have his research abstract be accepted to an international neuroscience conference. True or false?
Yes,
true.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
He's a pianist. He's a composer. Meanwhile, Sophia was reading fluently at 2.5.
She was, yes.
Good Lord. And she co-wrote this book when she was 8. She finished high school when she was 10 with a 90th percentile on the PSAT and has been a speaker at Science LA in 2017 and 2018.
Right. Yes.
Both.
All right. So I don't even know where to begin with this, but as neurologists, you're doing something right here. Like, how do you account for this? There's a nurture aspect to this. There's a nature aspect to this. I mean, this is extraordinary. I've never heard of two young people in the same house excelling at such a level in terms of like their brain health, which is what you guys are all about. So help me understand what's going on. And congratulations, by the way. I mean,
That's
unbelievable.
very kind of
I'm
you.
feeling very
Thank you
insecure
so
as a
much.
parent.
No, oh my God.
No, not at all.
The most important thing is, so I'm sorry if you,
No.
mother should, she's actually the reason.
No,
We can
no,
start
not
and
at all.
stop
No,
there.
I think it's teamwork, and I think I just want to say something first.
Yeah,
And
of course.
there are a lot of times it's tough to talk about your children, and because it's a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell my friends, ask me in 5 years after they go through their teenage years. But just really proud of their accomplishments, and I don't really consider them as mine. They're just these amazing individuals, and we feel like we're their guardians. And it's been such an amazing process of self-correction and reflection. Earlier, Dean was talking about the importance of anxiety management during childhood, and no matter how many books you read, no matter what scientific papers you read about and how much you know about how the brain works, when it comes to the application of that knowledge, it's a whole new experience. So it's been a growing period for both of us as well while raising these kids.
No, it's a challenge even now. I mean, expectations. So I say sometimes bombastically that the secret to life is management of expectations, but it's micro expectations, minute by minute expectations. From so early on, it wasn't about them following a curriculum, throwing things in front of them. I mean, the shower curtain was the periodic table, and the wall was the map, and so throwing in front of them and seeing which proclivities, and then you build around that and build around that. Small micro, almost like. Skinner's reinforcements. So you saw a little bit of improvement here or attention, and then you moved it along, and then before you knew it, I mean, Alex had, so one of his proclivities early on was, and it doesn't matter what it is, if you find that little nidus, it just grows, was memorizing capitals of, so by 2.5, 3,
Right.
he had memorized, and we have video, memorized all of the world's capitals, all the states' capitals, and I couldn't even. I'm terrible.
Yeah, okay.
Antananarivo.
Antananarivo, remember?
Yeah. So I mean, you would show him a shape, and he would say, "Oh, this is this country and the cow."
No, I remember when we used to go to a restaurant, and they would bring some chips and salsa or some bread. And he would take a chip and bite it off, and then he would look at it. Oh, Molly. I was like, "Who's Molly, honey?" No, country Molly. And he would just take another bite, like, look, Kenya. Wow. So he was just like a visual learner. It was so amazing to see him absorb all this information.
Again, work in progress.
Yeah.
We have the teenage periods where they get, the frontal lobe, and we tell them, there it is. There's the emotional brain taking over. But reality is, I think, and it's not because of us the potential of human brain. 87 billion neurons. We're talking about each of them making a couple of connections or 15,000 to 30,000 connections, 1 quadrillion connections, 1 times 10 to the 50th power. Now, the answer to that is not sit down and memorize. That's the worst thing. You narrow the funnel to a point. Yeah, you push through that funnel. They'll get to the college, maybe even Ivy League, but you've just killed all the 360 degrees of potential and creativity. The answer, I think, and we might be wrong, is throwing and systematically seeing where the proclivities and reinforcing. Proclivities takes a lot of work, but the human brain is absolutely remarkable, which speaks to both ends of the spectrum. From aging brain, which we are actually under, we keep talking about avoiding disease. I'm talking about profound growth of cognitive capacity well into our 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. And then for children, the brain is growing so fast. And the best argument on the internet is, are they choline deficient because they're not getting, eggs or something? Are you kidding?
Right.
Yeah.
So did you guys homeschool your kids, or how did you navigate the educational system to prevent them from, the best parts of them getting hammered out?
It was challenging, especially because when I had Sophie, I had just started my residency program. So it was a very intense time. And we explored different schools, different systems. They did very well initially for a few years in the Montessori system, which was kind of aligned with what we wanted them to be exposed to, thrown in an environment to see what works for them and have the option of absorbing oneself in one subject at a time rather than, having a couple of hours each and every subject every day. Just the mind doesn't really work that way. And after a while, we saw that the speed with which they were learning was probably inhibiting them to be creative in that environment. And there were a couple of stories where, the kids didn't feel very comfortable expressing their creativity and their knowledge because of the peer pressure, because of just the general setting. And when we realized that, I think Dean is fearless. He's way more fearless than I am. He said, no, I think we should withdraw right now and we should create an environment for them at home. And we were traveling quite a bit too. I actually got into a fellowship program at Columbia University, so I was going back and forth between home and New York, and we wanted the kids to have a constant creative environment, and so we homeschooled them. And my mother helped, his mother helped. We had a really good system going, and before we knew it, the kids were, and this is not just bragging about them, it was just an amazing example of how the brain works, where they would just, go deep into a subject and progress so much into it that a point came where we weren't able to help them with their homework anymore. For example, Alex went to algebra and then went to calculus. Sophie was so far in linguistics, we were just amazed. And so we quickly understood that the conventional model doesn't help at all. And they took their SATs and they did very, very well. And we were seeking for a program to keep them busy.
How old were they when they did the SATs?
They were 10. They both did the. I remember we went to the was it the Beverly Hills? Beverly Hills High School. We were living in Beverly Hills in Los Angeles then. And a day before the exam, we took Alex up the stairs and we went to the hallway because he was little. And we wanted him to see the environment and visualize and sit on the chair. And we were just waiting in the hallway for him. And we were so scared because, we hope that he doesn't feel uncomfortable. And I remember the chair was so tall for him that he decided to stand and write on the chair. But all in all, he just aced it. Wow. And it was wonderful.
I feel bad for the kids that were flanking him on each side, looking at a 10-year-old taking the test next to them.
The thing is, it's not about so much them getting high school at 10 or it's about it's not even about school or college. I think we're the only parents, although they're in Cal State LA right now, it has a special program called HEAP. We tell them, if you drop out of college, it doesn't matter to us.
Yeah.
For somebody, my cousins say that we have more degrees than a thermostat. It was useless, all of them. It's not about that. It's about creativity. It's about this incredible potential of the brain being often college, and I might get pushed back on this, actually kills creativity. These narrow hallways of thought can absolutely demolish creativity. So it's not even about high school finishing a high school early or college.
Or grades,
what can you do to bring this incredible potential of the brain to its full fruition? That's the goal.
Yeah, and creating a love of learning, of lifelong learning. And there is something, to touch on something you said a second ago, Ayesha, about depth versus breadth, like the idea of taking one subject and just immersing yourself in it and going all the way to the end, right? And learning it as you go, where it's so 360 degrees that you really learn it, as opposed to catching the major concepts and then constantly switching gears in between subjects and really just hitting the surface level of everything to check a box on a test.
Yeah, absolutely. We've witnessed it firsthand with the kids, where whatever subject it was, we would just allow them to immerse themselves in that subject, and it becomes a part and parcel of your fiber eventually. I remember when Sophie was into social sciences, she was into social sciences for 3 months straight, and then we went to where did we go? We went to Santa Barbara to show her the missions, and she was learning about the California missions and the history of Spain and how they came to the Americas. And it was just 3 months of complete immersive experience into that. And I think it really becomes a part of your experience as a person, as who you are.
Yeah, you're not going to forget that.
No, not at all.
No.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it would be worth taking a few moments to just share a little bit about what you do and your experience. I mean, as I said earlier, you were on the show a couple of years ago, but there's a lot of new listeners and viewers, and I think it would be helpful in terms of contextualizing everything that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're both neurologists, husband and wife. We initially started in this field, in this journey, because we were affected by an experience with our grandparents who went through Alzheimer's disease, and they experienced it. And I remember the first conversation Dean and I had. We met in Afghanistan, by the way, when he was there from the World Bank, changing the healthcare system in that country. And I was in medical school, and I volunteered with Doctors Without Borders. And because I'm a polyglot, I speak many languages, they would hire me and have me go to the harems in different villages to talk to women about health care and child care and prevention, so on and so forth. So we met at a party, and the first conversation we had was about our grandparents. And she
came, sat next to me.
Right. This is a very cinematic meet cute out of like a rom-com, right?
It was.
Okay.
I'll tell you the true version.
Yeah.
No, but I was amazed at him with all the amazing community work that he was doing, which is a whole another story. And we talked about our grandparents, and we were just so amazed at how these incredible human beings, our heroes, intelligent, just amazing humans, lost parts and parcels of themselves to the point where they couldn't recognize their children, they couldn't recognize their grandchildren, and these giants of human beings were just limited to nothingness. And we wanted to study it. We actually went into the field thinking that hopefully we'll be a part of finding a treatment for diseases of the brain like dementia and Alzheimer's. And it just kind of started from there.
Absolutely. The first meeting, we talked about them, and we were kind of blown away that these people with this kind of mind capacity would actually succumb to Alzheimer's. And so we came back to UCSD, which was the main dementia #1 neuroscience program with Leon Thal, and who was a giant. And we worked in his clinic and his lab. Ayesha did some amazing work with the fMRIs and published there. And quickly we realized that study after study after study is failing. The mouse models would work. Those poor mice, thousands upon thousands. You throw blueberry at mice, they will get better. I mean, every day you see a publication, this drug worked. And then when you look, it's a mouse model. It never translates to humans. So around the same time, we looked at some other people's work, and we said, we got to find a different path. And we had a conversation. We are risk takers. And we said, we're going to go to Loma Linda, because most of the lifestyle stuff that were coming to us, the work that Elizabeth Barrett Connor and others were doing, which we were working with, was congruent with Loma Linda, which is a Seventh-day Adventist institution where they've shown lifestyle has profound effect on brain health. So it was 60 miles away or 80 miles away. Right. We called, I cold called the dean of the university. I said, I'm coming from UCSD. Can I start a brain center here? They said, absolutely. We went in and started a Brain Health Institute. I did a double fellowship, double residency, preventive and neurology.
Yeah, I went to preventive medicines. Right. I think you and I coined the term preventive neurology, and that's what our focus has been: prevention of neurological diseases.
And what we found was remarkable here. So here in Loma Linda, not Loma Linda, the Seventh-day Adventist part of Loma Linda, which is about a third of the population, you have the healthiest people in the world. There's no question of that. The data is fairly clear. Nobody's contesting that fact. 5 miles away, across 10, you have San Bernardino, one of the unhealthiest places. So it's not environment. It's not even socioeconomic and racial. There's a little bit of socioeconomic. it is the most important thing in public health: access to information, access to resources, access to healthcare. There's a huge disparity. Whereas Seventh-day Adventists are health-centered from the religion perspective and everything. In San Bernardino, we work in free clinic even now, half a day a week we work there. 40-year-olds with stroke by the dozens we see.
Right.
I mean, that much disparity. So we started shifting and working and doing research, quite a bit of publication, and we realized that Alzheimer's, stroke, dementias can be prevented. And initially, when we came out like 10 years ago, incredible pushback. Whereas 2 years ago, we were at Alzheimer's International Conference, and the big plenary talk, big sign was, prevention is the new treatment.
It was amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think we ever high-fived in a conference, but we were just so happy that finally they're recognizing the importance of lifestyle.
Yeah.
How many practitioners are there in neurology right now that have a preventive focus?
Goodness, I don't know if many.
We don't know.
Preventive neurology.
I don't know.
There is.
Hopefully there's going to be more.
Guys.
Yes.
Hopefully there's going to be
Big
more.
speech from somebody, but not so many people doing it other than you guys.
No.
And it is interesting, like when you started, it was considered career suicide.
It was.
And to, plant your roots in Loma Linda, which, for people who don't know, that's one of the blue zones. People live very long there. They tend to have happier, more fulfilling lives, and that's attributable to their faith community, their fidelity to healthy lifestyle, exercise, predominantly a plant-based diet there for the most part, all of these things contributing to not only living longer, but as you immediately begin to see better brain health. And what makes it so amazing, almost like this perfect petri dish for the studies that you do, is that disparity, because the community just outside, the sort of boundaries of that Seventh-day Adventist community is, an impoverished, lower socioeconomic situation of people that don't have access to all of those things. I just repeated everything you said, but but that makes for a ripe environment for doing the kind of work that you do to kind of A/B test these populations.
Absolutely. I think we've learned so much about this concept. And one of the things that stands out is all about access. Access not only to healthy factors, healthy lifestyle factors, whether it's food and opportunity to move naturally or stress management, so on and so forth, but access to information and access to resources to apply that in their lives. To have health as a part of your language every single day, where you see left and right and front, behind you, there's health everywhere. That is what differentiates between two communities. When the Seventh-day Adventists, like Dean said, it's a part of their religion. When they walk, when they speak, when they wake up in the morning, when they go to bed, when they interact, the core structure behind their action is the outcome is good health. The outcome is preservation of the mind and the body. But when you veer away 5 miles across Highway 10 into San Bernardino, it's almost as if people are completely blind to that concept that it is possible for them to be the best versions of themselves. And you see their life just moving forward like automatons, not really aware of how bad their lifestyle factors are and how destructive it can be to their health.
And it's not a judgment. I mean, we want to make sure that it's situation. I mean, all of us get caught up in the cycle, especially when you have to work continuously. The closest healthy food resources 20 miles away.
Right.
So with that in mind, initially we went to Cedars-Sinai as the directors of brain health program there, prevention, and then an opportunity arose where in beach cities, which is Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, they had this program that Dan Buettner, our friend Dan, had started.
Yeah, it's Redondo is one of the blue zone cities,
That's right.
Yes. A created blue zone. And they had done such an amazing job as far as making it a lived concept that they offered us the option of coming there and creating an initiative, brain health initiative, and also the largest research protocol in the country, community-based. So we left everything again, risk taking. Who leaves
Right.
Cedars-Sinai, 1 day of clinic for Hollywood crowd?
You're insane.
But it's been, so since the 2 years that we talked, we've been actually growing that program. There are other studies like Pointer and others that are doing clinical research on lifestyle and brain health, but it's, again, more of a laboratory kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is a lived concept. I think we don't need to recreate whether, what is it, broccoli works versus, beef jerky. We know.
Yeah, I think we know that already.
Yes.
Yeah. There's enough information.
I don't know. There's some people that are confused about that.
There's always going to be noise. There's always going to be people who are going to say the Earth is flat.
Mm-hmm.
We'll leave them at that. They can go to the edge, but it's critical that we move on and apply it not to these contrived clinical trials of 100 people over 6 months or a year, to real communities. So we're doing 3 of the largest projects in the country, but it's a lived model of brain health.
Yeah.
And collecting data and collecting brain health and information.
Yeah, and we're really excited about that because I think one of the things that failed in most studies is not understanding what works at an individual level and at the community level. Mm-hmm. I think if we find out specifically what the limitations and what the strengths are in any community, and then find resources around them in their environment that would help them create a vector towards better health, that's the key. And it has to be long enough where they have support, where they have contact with the human experience of speaking with someone else or being around a supportive group to acclimate to that new healthful environment.
Yeah.
It sticks. Otherwise, it's just me giving someone a brochure and say, broccoli's good for you.
Right. I mean, that's a play right out of Dan Buettner's playbook, which is you have to create the environment that's conducive to the healthy choice. So then it becomes rote as opposed to some sort of burden or something that somebody has to think about in order to do, right? Yeah. It's just there in front of them. And, the kind of resources of the community are pushing you into the correct lane. Right.
And especially for a condition like cognitive decline, which is... it's tremendous. It's scary. Everybody talks about Alzheimer's and dementia as if it's a disease that just starts at one point. Mm-hmm. You are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. That's it. That's not the start. Right before that, decades earlier, there's a continuous cognitive decline that people experience. And, Dean and I go to different communities for talks, and before all this pandemic, when you go into a communities where their health literacy is low, or for example they haven't had any resources, you actually experience the cognitive decline when speaking with individuals in their 50s and 60s before they even are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And it's scary, and the numbers are scary, and we never address that. And it's not just brain health. You hear about brain health all the time. You read great books, but it's that self that is under attack. It's that us. It's that usness. It's the sense of being aware and being present and being able to experience life. We're being robbed of that. You hear brain fog, you hear memory problems, but not being able to be present for each and every moment in your life, that's what's taken away from people. And that's scary. And if we have a way of making people attuned where we alarm them that, listen, there is something that you can do where you don't have to go through this, I think that would be a great opportunity. And it's a great gift for us to be able to serve people that way. Right.
So conventional medical wisdom, at least until recently, is or was that Alzheimer's is something that is going to be visited upon many, many people when they reach, late 60s, 70s, something like that. It's basically a genetic predisposition. In more cases than not, it's a death sentence. There's not much we can do about it. We can't cure it. We can't prevent it. We can kind of maybe manage it with some drugs, but really there isn't much that we can do. and we're working on a cure, but we aren't very close. So how much of that is accurate, and where does your work fit in to kind of upend that paradigm?
So the genetic component, let's start with that. We know the genes that are involved in Alzheimer's with new techniques like GWAS analysis and others, where you take large populations who have Alzheimer's and those that don't. You look at the genetic differences. We know about more than 30 genes that are involved in Alzheimer's. Of all Alzheimer's cases, the percentage that's driven by genes, 100% driven by genes, meaning that if they have these genes, they'll get it. In genetic terms, it's called 100% penetrance, like Huntington's disease. If a person has the Huntington gene on that chromosome 4, they'll get it.
Right.
But the percentage of Alzheimer's cases that are like that is only up to 3%. The other 97% are affected by genes, but they are only risk genes, meaning that those genes increase your risk, but they're not a foregone conclusion. It doesn't mean that you will get it. The next highest risk gene is ApoE4. About 2% of the population has ApoE4, is ApoE4 positive. So if you have one of those genes coming from one parent, your risk goes up 4 times. If you have 2, one from each parent, about 12 times. That number varies, but roughly those are the numbers. So even if you have 2 genes fully loaded with these bad genes, 50% of people get the disease. The other 50% don't get it. Why? And when you look at the data coming from Nigeria, where the population had higher proclivity for ApoE, when they came to US, the disease went up. When you look at the studies that came from UK, which lifestyle increased your risk 6 times, even in lieu of ApoE4, you realize even with the higher genetic risk of ApoE4, lifestyle is a way bigger factor, by far. So all of the genes involved in Alzheimer's, except for those 3% or 3 genes, are all our lifestyle genes. How your lifestyle affects those genes, which means you have control over it. Even the most benign studies, the ones that had minimal effect, the MIND study and others. MIND study just looked at diet, very well done study. Just a diet adjustment reduced your risk of Alzheimer's by 53%.
Wow.
And that was a watered down version of the diet we think is optimal.
And how long would you need to be, eating in that certain way leading up to it? It
varies from person to person, their background, other things like if they had multiple head traumas, childbirth, like multiple variables. But in reality, if you're on that diet for several years, you continually reduce your risk. Like smoking, if you've smoked all your life, and if you come off of smoking, come off of that bacon, come off of that, then the more years you pass, I believe in smoking, it's after 5 years?
5 to 7 years,
5 to 7 years, you're back to baseline.
Right.
Meaning that you're back to the lowest risk factor. So the longer you stay on a healthy lifestyle, which is exercise and all the things that we say, and especially if you do all of them, the reason I say all of them, coming back to our grandparents, one of the elements is cognitive reserve, or what the term you and I love, idea density. We say that if we have a musical band that's going to be called idea density. Yeah. They had idea density. Like yes. It's a great concept. They both our grandparents had immense idea density and philosophers, thinkers, but they succumbed to Alzheimer's. Why? The other elements weren't taken care of. They had diabetes, cholesterol, high blood pressure,
quite
horrible
sedentary,
food.
bad food.
Didn't exercise. Philosophers are not supposed to exercise for some reason. But so you have to do all of it.
Right. So we're going to get into these lifestyle interventions. But before we do that, let's talk about the brain more generally. We sort of think of the brain as this mysterious black box that is unknowable and something that sits outside of our body, right? Like there's our body and then there's our brain, and these things don't really overlap. But in truth, brain health is really it's about vascular health in the same way that heart health is, right? Like we're dealing with, I don't know how many zillions of arteries that are going into the brain, putting things into your brain and taking them out, et cetera. And when you think about, heart disease, we all know we're trying to not have plaque in our arteries and keep those pipes running clean. Mm-hmm. And brain health is really not that different, is it?
That's very true. No, you put it beautifully. When you look at the brain, it's about 3 pounds. It's like Jell-O. It's like hard Jell-O when you hold it in your hands. And it's about 2% of your body's energy. And when you look at the tissues and the vessels, they're the same vessels that are in your heart and in your kidney and in your body. I'm a vascular neurologist, so I teach a lot of anatomy to medical students and residents about the vasculature of the brain. But basically, you have arteries shooting from your heart going through the neck. There's 2 major ones in the front, the carotid arteries and the vertebral arteries. And these are the major vessels that take blood to your brain. And there's just branching of these arteries. And somebody actually calculated this, but if you put the vessels in your brain end to end, it would span about 400 miles. Uh-huh. So just imagine all these tiny hairline arteries taking in oxygen and nutrients to these susceptible areas of the brain for this incredible organ to function. And at any moment, our brain, as little and as small as it is, it can consume up to 25% of the body's energy. So just imagine the amount of work that it does. And if we don't address vascular health, and if we don't really take care of it, it will succumb to disease. We always say, and our cardiologist friends don't really like that, but we say the rest of the body is there to carry the brain. Mm-hmm. It essentially comes down to the same pathological processes that affect the brain that also affects the heart, the kidneys, and the other systems as well.
Mm-hmm. In fact, recently there was a publication by Dr. Hitchinski from Canada, and he summarized the concepts, but the vascular factors actually predate, the popular thing that we hear, amyloid plaque and tangle. Vascular pathology predates those things. With the newer tools, with newer, more sophisticated MRIs, you can see 20 years earlier when somebody starts having some pathology. And the microvascular disease started way earlier. So if we take that into consideration, that in your 20s, 30s, 40s, the things you do isn't going to just avoid Alzheimer's. And we think absolutely for a great majority, 90% plus, you can avoid Alzheimer's. But more importantly, sustain cognitive capacity and grow cognitive capacity. We know that we don't use the full potential of the brain. And in fact, as we get older, one of the areas that's affected the most is focus for 2 reasons. One is the focus center shrinks, as well as the fact that we're overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. Multitasking, which we say there's no such thing as multitasking, it's doing multiple things badly. Right. It just accumulates and accumulates. But if you manage and control focus, you can actually grow your cognitive capacity as you get older. That's our goal, because if you do that, if we address this is critical, if we address the vascular factors and the fact that we can grow the brain, we can hit all these communities that are now devastated with cognitive decline. Mm. And we see them all the time.
Right. So neuroplasticity then becomes a function of vascular health.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Super interesting. When we think of, again, back to the kind of heart analogy, we think of plaque buildup in terms of deteriorating heart health. With brain health, it's amyloid plaque, right? Which is different, but kind of the same, like it's blocking these passageways, and that's ultimately what leads to stroke.
Correct.
Is that right?
No, with stroke, it's atherosclerotic plaques. It's different. Amyloid actually accumulates outside of the neurons and stops the communication between the neurons. So it's a little different.
In between the neurons.
In between neurons.
Right, okay.
The neurofibrillary tangles, which is the tau, is inside the cells. There are 2 things happen. One is the amyloid plaques and the neurofibrillary tangles. They're connected in many ways. We are learning more and more. The neurofibrillary tangles are really interesting. There are these scaffoldings that hold the microtubules inside the cell steady. Mm-hmm. The microtubules are, it's almost like we just got the Oculus, and I was doing and it's a crazy thing. We were doing the roller coaster thing, and you see this roller coaster throughout the planet go, and the microtubules are these pipelines throughout the cell for transport, for structure, and everything. and the tau molecules hold them together. All of a sudden, they get phosphorylated and they come off. And then you see these scaffoldings fall apart and clog together. So for many years, we've thought that that's a separate process. It's a genetic proclivity. And there are those 3% variety. But we know that inflammation also attributes to that. Multiple traumas to the head, infections, multiple pathways to trauma, oral hygiene and all of that, as well as vascular factors. So wait a second. So if vascular factors and inflammatory factors are contributing to even those tau and amyloid cofactors, we have control over those.
Right. Yeah. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like just the realization that we do have some domain over this thing that we've always kind of thought of as just looming out in the distance, and it's either going to happen or it's not going to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just understanding that our day-to-day habits affect those small little arteries in our brain. You know, when you have sustained damage to the arteries, or sustained attack, let's just say, an attack to the system. So the body and the brain especially is constantly trying to revert any damage. We have damage control mode and we have a thrive mode. And the goal is to be more in the thrive mode rather than damage control. And the damage comes from, say, for example, vascular damage comes from sustained high blood pressure. Blood pressure is one of the most important risk factors for so many chronic diseases that we're dealing with. When we have uncontrolled blood pressure, the small blood vessels in our brains, they essentially collapse on themselves. And on MRIs, what we see is these patterns called white matter disease. White matter disease is when there is damage to the blood vessels. And so those parts of the brain are inflamed or they don't really function very well. A lot of times they were called non-specific white matter disease, but we're actually learning more and more about them. And they have been correlated with cognitive decline. They've been correlated with strokes. And we know that lifestyle factors can really alter them, can change them. Diabetes is another risk factor. Damage to the inner linings of the arteries can cause damage. And, there are parts of the brain that require, well, all parts of the brain, but specifically the ones that are responsible for, say, for example, encoding memory, the hippocampi, or the frontal lobe where the judgment sits, or the emotion centers. When the blood vessels are damaged in these areas, we really can't function anymore. And that's when you see cognitive decline.
Yeah, it's interesting with blood pressure. That's something that you get checked, I don't know, when you're younger, barely ever when you go to the doctor for your checkup, but it feels like something that should be monitored much more regularly and closely.
Absolutely. Because it's variability in high blood pressure that matters as well. And I'm so excited about, new technology coming up, whether it's, the watches or, any wearable devices that can give just a quick update on how someone is doing, a live update.
Right.
I think that's the most important thing. You can't really wait for every 3 months or every year to get your blood pressure checked. Yeah. We see people in their 40s and 50s coming in with extremely high blood pressure, and we have to treat it rapidly with medication to prevent strokes and damage to their body. It's quite ubiquitous.
Before we get into the lifestyle interventions, I want to talk about this neuro paradigm that you guys have come up with. Perhaps it would be good to differentiate between cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's, and strokes. Like, let's get clear on the difference between all of these
terminology.
Things. Yeah.
So dementia is the umbrella category. And dementia is, the rough definition of it is when a person is having cognitive decline to the extent where they can't do some of their activities they could do before. Not because of physical limitation, because of cognitive limitation, be it memory or processing capacity or things of that nature. For example, if they could drive before, now they're having difficulty driving because they can't think their way through the directions. If they could take care of their medications, they can't take care of their medications now. If they were doing the finances, they can't take care of the finances. You have to be careful there because as we get older, without knowing, you kind of pass off your activities to others. And when you ask the family, I don't know, I don't see a difference. But what happened is over time, that responsibility was passed on. But when you truly check them, they have had loss of capacity. That's dementia. It's an umbrella category. Alzheimer's is a subtype of that dementia. It's a major one. 60 to 70% of all Alzheimer's dementias is Alzheimer's. But there are other types of dementia, such as frontotemporal lobe dementia, Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, Parkinson's dementia, and many others, Huntington's dementia. But Alzheimer's is the biggest one. They manifest differently, and the causes are somewhat different, although we think that all of them are affected to different degrees by lifestyle. Some of them are more genetically driven, like frontotemporal lobe dementia is more genetically driven. That dementia is early in life. Sometimes it affects language. So like primary progressive aphasia, the person can think, but their language is affected disproportionately early on. Lewy body dementia is more movement and hallucinations and visuospatial changes. And it's a different pathway. It's a synuclein body. It's a different kind of protein. Alzheimer's, and this is something that everybody's familiar with. I'm going to say it, but I want to state it ahead of time. Don't be scared. We all have some of this, where short-term memory early on is disproportionately affected compared to long-term memory. So a lot of, especially men, they say, oh, I'm fine. Dean, I'm fine. I can remember 50 years back when I was in, but I just, I'm having difficulty with breakfast. Well, that's what's happening.
Right.
The short-term memory, which is in the hippocampus, is affected disproportionately. And it's the fastest growing epidemic, well, outside of COVID now, in the West. We're talking about 6 million individuals in US, 35 million worldwide. And this number, we have to change the number every time we talk.
Yeah, every time we have a PowerPoint presentation, we have to change these numbers, unfortunately.
I read recently 47 million people worldwide.
Worldwide, yes.
Yeah.
So we have to change it again.
Yeah. And estimates are that it's projected to triple by 2050.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
And the
So
worst,
everybody's going to be impacted.
everybody.
Yeah.
In fact, even now, if you ask families, I did my PhD thesis around community-based participatory research in the minority populations, and those populations, or in low socioeconomic populations, every family's been affected, but they haven't called it dementia or Alzheimer's. That's how ubiquitous it is already. Now, the numbers as far as cost is even, the human component is incredibly bad because it's affecting everybody. And we'll talk about what COVID did in this tsunami. This population was the most affected population in the world, the Alzheimer's population. But the cost, the second costliest disease is heart disease at 120 billion, cancers, 70 billion combined. Alzheimer's, direct cost, 305 billion, indirect cost, 240 billion right now. And it's climbing up to $1.1 to $3 trillion, direct and indirect, by 2050, which will collapse our system altogether.
Yeah, the system's already broken. It can't bear that kind of load. But is that excessive cost attributable to the slow burn nature of this and the extent to which kind of live-in care is required for these people to live their lives, or where is all that money going?
It's sad. It's going, well, the direct cost is going to Medicare, medications, which really don't do much. Not even the pharmaceutical companies claim that Aricept and Namenda reverse or slow down the disease. It doesn't. They're just symptomatic. The disease is continuing. It's just doing a little bit of help with the symptomatics. But a lot of money is spent there in care, nursing home, and others. The indirect cost is, you should see the people, the families that can afford it the least have to stay home to take care of the loved ones, which means hours lost, work lost, and all of that happens with it.
Right. Devastating. And on top of that, we have COVID right now, and COVID is really drastically impacting the Alzheimer's community, right? Like I saw on Twitter like 2 days ago, there was a Barron's article about this that was like trending, what does the future of Alzheimer's look like? And I know that you guys have spoken about this. What is it about COVID that's disproportionately impacting the Alzheimer's community in such a bad way?
It's a multifactorial, like Dean said. The numbers are scary. We were actually reading an article the other day, and Alzheimer's patients are dying faster, not because of the infection or COVID-related consequences, but because of their disease. I think the number was 16% higher rate of mortality in that population. And it has to do with loneliness, disconnection,
the
isolation from human experience. And, the brain is hungry for information and for connection. And when that withers away, when that's withdrawn, you see patients succumb to Alzheimer's disease. And there's so many stories that we could tell you from our clinic and just talking with some of the caregivers where these lovely patients are completely isolated in a nursing home and they don't see their children or their loved ones. And the mind is such where if they don't get that conversation, even a phone call or, just a mundane conversation about food or clothes or just a normal walk in the park, basically the brain just completely withdraws and withers away. And there's profound changes in a decline in their cognition to the point where they forget to do their basic activities of daily living. They forget to eat. They forget to take care of themselves. And slowly and gradually that causes disease and death. And we've seen that so many times, unfortunately, more than we would wish to see.
And this is a population that's most vulnerable.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Anxiety, I say, you and I, Ayesha and I, we treat anxiety more than we treat the memory component because it's a quality of life issue, isn't it? I mean, and patients with Alzheimer's, anxiety is ubiquitous and rapidly growing. I give an analogy and it's not, and a patient with Alzheimer's initially feels like they're in their basement, now living in their basement. Not really, but that discomfort. Then in the neighbor's home, then in a different city, then in a different country, then ultimately in Mars with Martians coming because nobody's familiar. That anxiety compounded with loneliness, with isolation, with separation is what forces the brain to actually collapse upon itself. We think that the reason for the greater mortality is not so much that because they were in closed environments, therefore they suffered from COVID, but because of the greater loneliness in the population that could afford that the least.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some personal experience with people that are suffering from Alzheimer's, and my sense, and this is just purely like anecdotal, is, well, first of all, you can read the anxiety coming a million miles away. Like you could tell these people are not settled in who they are, that there's some confusion. And what I see more often than not is almost like a veneer of denial or an effort to like comport themselves as if they know what's going on, like out of fear that somebody might know that something's amiss or awry. And I'm often left wondering, like, what is the level of self-awareness that this person, this patient, has about the nature of their condition? Like, are they aware that they're suffering and they're actively trying to put up a front, or is this something that just occurs with this disease? Like, what is their interior experience of what's happening?
It's tough to know because it varies, but it's the fight or flight, isn't it? So, I mean, I've seen this repeatedly. Your autonomic manifestation and behavior is fight or flight. And my grandmother, who was a powerful woman, and I actually, in the last years of her life, I actually shared the room with her. And being a stupid teenager, I didn't appreciate that experience, which was profound and important, and I should have been more aware. And this person that would face you, would talk to you with clear language, because she knew that in order to be in a world of men, she had learned very early on to be very succinct and clear. She started turning away from the world, so the withdrawal. So you see a lot of people just withdrawing, not being as involved, and in her case, she actually turned around towards the wall. She would actually start facing the wall. That's a withdrawal. Push. The others push away, the fight. And it's not often it's not a conscious awareness that something is wrong. It's a discomfort that manifests in those two outcomes. And if people are aware of that, then you realize that, and that's why a lot of bad interpersonal relationships early on, because people don't know that the Alzheimer's is coming and the manifestation is this behavior, and it turns out really bad. And with my grandmother, it was that. It was the withdrawal. But a lot of people actually then have this pushback.
Right.
Pushback, which is the discomfort. Discomfort, something is wrong, and the only tool I have is pushing back.
Right. Get away and leave me be.
Yeah.
Right. And what is the appropriate response? Like, I'm sure you've seen all kinds of different dynamics with how people interact with somebody who's suffering. Have you come upon an appropriate kind of way of interacting with somebody who's in this space that's more productive than other ways?
Yeah, I think, again, it varies. It depends on the history that the caregiver has had with the patient, the individual with Alzheimer's, and the support structure that they have. But I think one of the most helpful things that I have had experience with my patients and training the caregivers to take care of them is to let them know that it's very important to differentiate between the individual and the disease. They're two separate things and entities. And that actually makes everything fall in place, because if, say, for example, Sally is someone who has Alzheimer's disease, and Sally used to be an amazing human being, had her own job, raised a family, fantastic in the community. She sang, she was part of her church, so on and so forth. And slowly she started forgetting things, and now she can't do any of those things. So the family and the caregivers should make sure that they remind her of who she was and who she is. Those stories of the things that she did are essentially her medicine and a reminder of who she is and how she's contributed to this world. And the symptoms of forgetfulness, of making mistakes, of saying strange, inappropriate things or acts that are inappropriate, that's the disease. That's not her. And that resolves some of the anxiety within the patient, with the caregiver. Caregivers tend to have this need to fix things. We always want to fix people. We want to fix patients. There's no need to fix anything. And somehow when you differentiate the two, then that desire to fix goes away, and you just focus on the beautiful stories and the memories that that patient has already had, and focusing on the moment.
Beautiful.
And Dean actually has this beautiful, I love that thing that you do with, the islands of consciousness.
So my attempt at defining consciousness, if there is such a thing, is there are islands of consciousness. So the first island is when you're 3 years old or so, and you become aware of yourself as separate from the universe, from the world. And then there's the island of the mother, and the island of the father, and the island of the family, and islands of job, and so on and so forth. Some of them are more powerful than others. That's why the most lovely thing you see is when a husband has dementia and they don't recognize anything, and then the wife comes in, and you see this. It's almost as if the greatest party in the universe just opened up doors, because that island, that this wife is still the island, that central island that's connected. So keeping those islands connected early on with cognitive decline is critical. Getting rid of the damage, which is the food and the exercise, and also building connections, those billions of connections that we can't create, so we can keep the tethers into the different islands. That's why people remember long-term better than short-term. So one of the things we can do to stabilize, at least for a while, is have 20 great stories from the past that you've lived those experiences when you went to some island as a family, or some resort or somewhere, and you had that enjoyment, and he or she remembers it. Build on that, even embellish it more, and you have those 20 stories. The greatest anxiety-reducing tool that I've ever given my patients had nothing to do with a prescription, although I write this in prescription actually, is build those 20 stories, and whenever you see the first signs of anxiety, throw that in. That long-term island, that big island, takes over. And I've never seen anything like that, where the conversation just goes there and the anxiety is just resting.
Yeah.
And you build on those islands, especially early on, build on those islands of memory and connect them further on. And that becomes your best anxiety reducer. You know what's another great island? Which actually passes way beyond the loss of language. Music. Repeatedly we've seen where this person can no longer connect with anybody. And now they can't even remember their
Right.
partner. you put that one piece of music from the 40s or 30s that they loved, and then you see them just moving their fingers to the music and just calming down. So you can build around those islands for the people, for the individuals that are more advanced. For those who haven't developed Alzheimer's, is building those connections so that the islands can keep connected. That's where the ultimate consciousness, we believe that consciousness as we define it, is when multiple of these islands are connected, so you can see a meta version of yourself within all these islands.
Oh, so you use those stories to create a lattice work or like a matrix that forms the underpinnings of identity, and that gets rooted in the
This
person.
is not fair.
All I'm doing is repeating what you said.
No, but you do it so much better.
That's
Yeah.
beautifully put.
All right. Well,
absolutely.
Nobody wants to befall this fate, right? And you know, when we're young and vital, we think we're bulletproof and this is never going to happen. But these diseases start to take root early in our lives. We don't see the symptoms for many years, so it's all about these habits that we form around diet and lifestyle. So set us up with this paradigm that you guys have come up with, and we can walk through some of these habits that you guys have realized have been extremely helpful in managing symptoms and preventing people from headed down this path.
Sure. So not to go into the depth and details of the science, which we could do, and we probably will spend some hours just going into it. But when you look at the basis of the pathology that takes place in the brain and the body, for that matter, is just a few processes. These are inflammatory processes, oxidation, abnormalities in metabolism of glucose or energy, and abnormalities in the metabolism of lipid. These are the four main pathways that cause damage to the vasculature, the blood vessels in the brain, and it causes damage to the neurons and the neural connections as well. And when you look at the mechanism of how these come about, they're very closely linked to your lifestyle. So it has to do with food, with the way you move and exercise, with stress management, with sleep. My goodness, sleep, such an important part of our day. And also how we connect socially, emotionally to our communities. And whether it's, studies coming from, say, for example, in Columbia University, where I trained, from the Northern Manhattan study, or from the Rush University studies, or from the Adventist Health study, different studies from around the world, when you look at the factors that stand out, that contribute to better brain health, it's nutrition, it's exercise, it's stress, it's sleep, and the one that we added is cognitive activity. Mm-hmm. So
that's the optimization.
That's right. So when we wrote the first book, we came with this acronym, Neuro, NEURO. Of course, it's self-explanatory, and it was good because we're neurologists and helped us a lot too.
It all came together.
It came together, and N is for nutrition, E is for exercise, U is for unwind, which is stress management, not just getting rid of stress, but increasing good stress and getting rid of bad stress. And R is for restorative sleep, deep restorative sleep that helps cleanse the brain and it has its own function, and optimization of cognitive activity.
Right. Some of these, if not all of them, feel like common sense. And yet also, I think the nutrition piece, everybody knows if you want to take care of your body, you got to eat right? Sleep, exercise, challenging yourself mentally, being in a community of people that you're connected to. These are all things that we kind of intuitively know are good for our health. The nutrition piece, would you say is there one that stands out as more important than the others, or do these all work? Obviously, this is a holistic thing, so they're all interconnected. But if you had to pick one, is that even possible?
I don't think it's fair.
I guess if you don't sleep at all and you eat a perfect diet, it's not going to matter.
No, I think it's the multifaceted nature of this that actually makes a big difference. And when you look at different communities and individuals as well, they might excel in one thing, but they might be falling behind on others. And it's understandable. We can't really control everything, but all of them are important. What would you say?
No, I fully agree with you. I think all of it has to be done. And it's incredibly empowering to know that, because every time we say that, somebody says, oh, my friend did all of it, but no, none of us did all of it. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about living the food part is pretty specific. I mean, we don't have that many communities that lived in the way that we were talking about, and we'll talk about it, as far as whole food, plant-based. We're talking about exercise, significant exercise. We're not talking about whenever we talk to our patients, say, "Oh, I got Dean, I'm fine. I do the gardening, I do the walking." No.
Or, for example, my patients, when they say, I'm walking all day long from my living room to the kitchen, back to the living room.
Yes.
That's not exercise.
It's got to be a significant amount of exercise.
Right.
And then stress management. It's not about just getting rid of bad stress. By the way, none of us are doing that well. Mm-hmm. And it's not just because you meditated. Meditation is phenomenal, but it's got to be an all-day, but also about good stress, which is one of the things that actually gets people to the dementia stage fastest is what they did throughout their life as far as cognitive activity and challenge. That's profoundly important. Sleep. None of us do sleep well. Just because we took some medicine, we're talking about restorative sleep where people go through the circadian, the 4 phases of sleep 4 to 5 times a night deeply. We invest in incredible resorts. We've been invited to different venues. I say, take that money and, we're not going to tell, put it in your bedroom. Uh-huh. There's a reason why we're knocked out. Evolutionarily, how would it make sense that you're subject to being mauled by bears and lions for 1/3 of your life unless it was that important? So sleep and investing in sleep is profoundly important. We're doing the largest one with the sleep study, shows that 70% increased risk of dementia for those who have bad sleep. Mm-hmm. And then there's optimization, which is challenging mental activity. If you think you're retired and you can go lie down on the beach, that's great for a few months. But if you continue, that's going to be the fastest point of decline for cognition. Because if this brain, which is consuming 25% of your body's weight, and realizes, oh, I'm not being used, especially at a time where you're aging, you know what it will do? It will actually shrink more rapidly. Mm-hmm. So all of it has to be done. And all of them have to be done together. But the beauty is, if they're done, and if it's not just a diet du jour, or the New Year resolution run or walk, and if it's lifestyle, and especially if it's lived lifestyle, which is what we're trying to do in communities, we're talking about 90% reduction in Alzheimer's, dementia, stroke, without any biohacking or vitamin du jour or any of that stuff, with regular things you have in your, in your environment.
And I think one of the focus of our study, which is, the largest community-based study in the country now in beach cities, is the applicability of this knowledge. I think we have tremendous amount of information about the kind of diet and the kind of exercises that are good for the brain, even stress management, so on and so forth. But what we haven't really focused and what I don't see much of is bridging that gap between the knowledge that we have, the incredible amount of information that we have, and how people apply it at their homes.
That's always the trick.
Yes. It really is.
Right.
It really is. And so I think more focus needs to go towards that, the translation of all this amount of information we have.
And people aren't very good at estimating or calibrating, how they're adhering to any of these things anyway. I mean, most people tell you, I exercise, like you were saying, like I exercise, or I eat pretty good, like, everything in moderation. And, these things are divorced from reality more often than not.
Yeah, absolutely.
My 2 least favorite words in language is motivation and moderation. Motivation is a top-down word that has no denominator. What is that? It's almost like puts pressure on kids. Like, if I don't have it all the time, something's wrong with me. I don't have motivation all day.
Yeah.
So it's important to operationalize motivation in small successes that get you that little dopamine and serotonin release. So it's not about the goal. It's about the process. Mm-hmm. If it's not reduced to process that's in your lived life and you don't enjoy that process, even if you achieve the goal, it then becomes anticlimactic. Okay, I just did this. Now what? Oh, I fall down to the baseline. So we have to create environments where the process is the thing in itself. I don't want to sound like those philosophers. The thing in itself is the process, not the goal, not the diet, not that. So that's where the change has to happen. And then the other word is moderation. Moderation is a word people use to get out of doing things. Let's be honest. As soon as you say, oh, Dean, it's all about moderation. but you just had 4 steaks. Where's what part of moderation? I'm not judging people, but we have to say this is the optimal that we know to the best of our knowledge today, and that's where the humility of science comes in. When people say, "But Dean, you just changed your perspective on olive oil." Yeah, because it's not about me. It's not even about neuro. You can throw away neuro. It's whatever science gives us, and it might not be perfect, but it's a methodology that's changeable not with people's ideas, but with a process. And if it changes tomorrow, my ego is not affected. So we have to kind of move that. And if we do that, I think we can really address this calamity, which is cognitive decline, which is affecting every community we're seeing.
So let's dive into the nutrition piece. Whole food, plant-based diet is your preferred protocol here. So of all the, within the acronym neuro, perhaps that might be the most controversial for the average person to get their head around. So how did you arrive at this being, the diet that you're recommending?
Right. So when you look at different epidemiological studies and even clinical trials on diet and brain health, the elements that stand out, they're all plants. Whether it's studies coming from Northern Manhattan study or Adventist study and all these other epidemiological studies that I mentioned earlier, the foods that have the most anti-inflammatory agents, that have antioxidants, that have a proper synergistic combination of micronutrients and macronutrients happen to be plants. And, as much as we try to stay away from calling foods superfoods or, good foods and bad foods, there are some that seem to be more beneficial and there are some that seem to be harmful. And so when you and I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with some databases, the California Teacher Study. And what I did was I studied how the Mediterranean diet, which everybody talks about, is structured and made. And when you look at the Mediterranean diet or the Mayan diet, again, the food that come on top are vegetables and plants. They're fruits and legumes and nuts and seeds and whole grains, unadulterated plant-based foods. And the more of these people consume in different communities, the less stroke they have, the less Alzheimer's disease they have, the less chronic diseases of aging they have. And they've been associated with vascular risk factors like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. So lower of these tend to actually improve brain health. Now, I know that there's a lot of noise out there and there are different dietary patterns and, there's always this fight. There's a lot of diet wars going on. But when you look at the science and the mechanism, it always comes towards plants. And it's a spectrum, right? So how much do you want to stay? How long and how much do you want to stick to the healthier foods? That's what determines better brain health.
When I hear Mediterranean diet, I'm always befuddled because I'm not sure whether that's they're referring to a robust panoply of fruits and vegetables and nuts, seeds and legumes, or we're talking about wine and cheese and olive oil. Right? As somebody like at least in the scientific context, when you're doing these kinds of studies, like how do they define that?
Oh, it's not that difficult actually. So there are different processes and there are mechanisms in statistics and in science where you do factor analysis and you see what food stands out. And that's one of the things that we are actually doing in one of our studies to see, what is the effect of specific foods on brain health. And wine, cheese, pasta, when you see the Mediterranean diet advertisement on the magazine, so pretty lady sitting next to a lake drinking wine. But it's not that. It's actually the foods that are unprocessed and plant-based that seem to stand out. But again, even science has its flaws, and there are some studies and some study that we were actually reading about a couple of days ago just came, and it was published in a reputable journal, saying that cheese, daily consumption of lamb and up to a bottle of wine seemed to reduce the risk for Alzheimer's disease, and that plants were actually bad for you. So it's just this manipulation
As
of data.
Compared to what? Like, how was that study set up?
The study was well designed. The source of funding is questionable, so we won't go there. But so it speaks to how science can be manipulated,
Right.
even in the right environments. It can be manipulated. Depends on what variables you throw into the formula, right? If you don't take into consideration the socioeconomic status, I mean, who eats cheese, wine, and lamb? Higher socioeconomic population, which
People
means
who
that
can
they probably
afford it,
took care of themselves. And who did you compare against? People who had very low socioeconomic and therefore they had low resources, that they actually had other vascular risk factors and other things. So data can be manipulated, but the massive body of evidence, and California teacher study, Ayesha actually was the main author of this, 133,000 people over 20 years. Adventist Health Study, 97,000 people over 50 years. We're talking about, the Harvard study and Women's Health Study, large studies. The massive data shows, Rush study, same things, a large study, that the dominant things that are helpful are the plants and vegetables and less processed food. So at the minimum, if people want to do something towards health, and if they don't even agree or they can't make the changes, which then they should reduce the processed food. We know that even among the meats, which if you go from beef jerky towards fish, you're more healthy. So we actually say, we are plant-based and we think that that's the best. Even plant-based, we don't say vegan because vegan can be unhealthy.
Right. That's like saying Mediterranean diet can mean many different things.
Right.
Exactly.
That's true.
We say plant-based, but thought out, planned. For example, that we are now pushing a little bit more olive oil. And even there, quantitatively less on the less side, because we think it can help with both consumption of the food as well as absorption of vitamins. And also the data shows that we were just at the end of a big review. We as far as supplements, we don't push a lot of supplements, but for certain populations, developing brain and aging brain and those who are going through pregnancy, omega-3s, whatever your source, seem to be, there's trend against science that there might be need for it. So there's data, you go with the data, we do, but it looks like the whole food plant-based diet seems to be by far most beneficial because of two reasons. It gets rid of the processed and all the negative elements, the vascular stimulant, the inflammatory products, and also gives you all the nutrients you ever need. All the deficiencies that you hear in the media, iodine deficiency or B12 deficiency, either they're not real or they can be easily mitigated while retaining all the benefit. That's why the diet has been shown repeatedly to be beneficial.
Right. Well, let's dive into that a little bit more deeply. And maybe we could start with fish. I mean, you hear all the time, especially in the context of brain health, like, oh, fish is good for brain health. And, there are studies that say fish is part of a healthy diet. Typically, those studies tend to be using fish as a comparison to beef and chicken. So it's not being compared to a whole food plant-based diet. But is it possible to maintain appropriate brain health without fish? What is it in fish that this is referring to? And if we're going to take fish off the plate, what do we need to make sure that we're taking in, that we're pushing all the right buttons?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. And you're right. Fish has always been compared to consumption of meat and chicken and other animal proteins. And so it seems to be better. And the reason being, it has lower saturated fat content, which saturated fat is a major reason for damage for arteries in the brain and in our body, and especially causing inflammatory changes in the brain and insulin resistance, so on and so forth. So there's a whole cascade that has been associated with saturated fats. And from a public health perspective, there's consensus that lowering the content of saturated fat in our diet is very important for better brain health. So that's one aspect of consumption of fish. But you're right, there has been no study to show that compared to a healthy, whole food, plant-based diet, a diet that contains fish is better. We don't have that information as of yet.
Well, we don't have it either way.
Right. We don't have it either way. We are concerned about animal proteins being a biomagnifier. Animals tend to retain elements that are surrounded within their environment. So, all the lead and the mercury and other organic compounds that we're dumping into the oceans, unfortunately, nowadays, they get concentrated in the flesh of these marine animals. And if people consume fish, they consume those elements as well. And we believe that could be an important factor for brain diseases. And we think that a well-managed whole food plant-based diet eliminates that risk. And that we can get the omega-3 fatty acids that come from marine animals with a plant-based diet if we take supplements, say, for example, at specific times during our life when our body needs it. So as a child, when a child is growing, or for example, when a woman is pregnant, or for example, when somebody's at a higher risk for developing mild cognitive impairment, supplement with omega-3 fatty acids derived from marine algae, which doesn't really absorb much of those the elements or the trace minerals, could be very helpful. So we believe that one can actually have a very good diet and a healthy diet without it.
The idea being that everything that you would get in a fish oil supplement, for example, you can get in an algae-based supplement. You're just getting it lower on the food chain. You're basically taking what the fish would filter through its body and supplementing it in a condensed form.
Exactly. The fish actually get the omega-3s from the marine algae.
So what you hear a lot of, and I'm interested in how you're thinking about this, is that given the importance of omega-3, that there is something about plant-based omega-3s that aren't as bioavailable or aren't converted in the proper way that they are when they're found in animal foods. Hence, why you should be taking fish oil or these other things. And I know you did a whole podcast with our mutual friend, Simon Hill. You've done many podcasts with him on his wonderful Plant Proof podcast, but you did like a whole episode on omega-3s. So we're not going to spend 2 hours on omega-3s, but like I do want to get this right.
Sure.
Yeah. So we don't know the total picture. I mean, this is, the humility of science is to say, this is how much I know, this is what we don't know. And we hate these battles about the absoluteness, absolutely not needed or absolutely needed. We don't have that much. So we did the complete review, 2 papers, one on developing brain and omega and the aging brain. And even there, we didn't have conclusive evidence, but there are trends, especially in populations that are more vulnerable. The trends are saying repeatedly, especially if the studies were done better and more, that there seems to be need for omega-3. Given the risk factor, although there are some people talking about prostate cancer, those studies are weak and the data is weak so far. But especially in populations that are vulnerable, the cost benefit for us, it appears to be on the side of using it. Not for everybody. I think if you're a young man or young woman in your 30s and 40s, if you want to take supplements, that's fine. But we think that there's enough data that if you have enough chia and flaxseed and a walnut, that you can do fine with it. But for a person that's pregnant, especially going from plant-based omega-3, for developing brains where it's doubling every other week in size and numbers, and the one thing you need for brain development that can't produce is DHA and omegas. We think that's definitely needed. And for a brain that's under attack from vascular reasons, inflammatory reasons, when it's aging, we think it's needed. The cost benefit actually speaks to it. The studies that would be there, that would be conclusive, have not been done. But having looked at the breadth of data when we did this research, we think the trends speak towards benefit.
And speak to this conversion issue. When we're talking about omega-3s, we're talking about DHA, ALA,
and EPA.
Yeah. It all gets very confusing very quickly here. But the idea is that, when you're taking those in on a plant-based diet, they're not converting in the right proportions, or you're losing out on some bioavailability here, and it just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
First of all, I think I've never heard this, but I thought about it the other day. I was like, wait a second, why are we worried so much about conversion? Do we have enough or not? For example, nothing in our body gets converted at 100%. We don't have 100% bioavailability for anything. Unless you inject it into the artery, you don't have bioavailability 100% for anything. much of what's actually ultimately bioavailable is in the lower teens, lower 20s. I mean, you eat it, it gets consumed. A lot of it just gets thrown out with the rest of it. And then whatever is bioavailable. With ALA, the percentage varies. Some people say 5%, some people say 8%, others say up to, it's not about what they say, studies show up to 12% or more. But that's plenty. If you have 1 or 2 tablespoons or tablespoons of chia, which it's a great food, chia or flaxseed or hemp, one of the few foods where the omega-3 ratio compared to omega-6 is higher.
Right.
You don't even have that in animal food. So you have much higher absorption of ALA. Now, the conversion of that to EPA and DHA is slower, but you can still get plenty. The problem is when you need more. We think that when your brain, which actually incorporates rapidly DHA, might not be getting enough with just those sources.
And is there some idea that if you're beginning to experience cognitive decline, or if you're at particular risk for that supplementing with omega-3s is a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, the studies that were actually the strongest were in the MCIs, or mild cognitive impairment.
Yeah, there was even slowing of the progression of MCI and even reversal some of the symptoms of patients who had MCI that took supplements and high doses of supplement that worked well for them. So yes, we do have evidence for that.
But we also want to couch this by saying better studies need to be done.
Right.
Lack of better studies does not negate trend and risk-benefit analysis, given that this is the most important, one of the most important micronutrients in the body, DHA.
Well, the omega-6, omega-3 ratio thing is super interesting because sort of if you look back 50 years, our ratio of 6:3 was very different than it is now because we didn't have this proliferation of processed foods that are so high in omega-6. So now we're all taking in tons of omega-6, not enough omega-3. And so how much of our omega-3 intake or supplementation, how much of that is to kind of calibrate that ratio versus what we need independent of omega-6? In other words, if we're eating tons of omega-6, it seems to follow that we would then need to take in more omega-3 to create that correct ratio.
There's a bigger problem, which speaks to why we have to go whole plant-based. So if you're eating omega-6, the pathway of conversion of DHA, EPA is actually a rate limiting step. So if you're having more omega-6s, you actually convert the omega, you can't get enough DHA conversion. So one of the things you have to do is reduce the omega-6 conversion as well, because the same enzyme that actually does the conversion is limited by both of them. If you have more omega-6, it becomes the rate limiting step.
Of conversion of ALA to DHA.
Correct. Yeah. So it's critical that not just to increase omega-3s, ALA and others, but also reduce omega-6 sources. And what are those sources? All the foods that have increased in the last, 70, 80 years, which are the processed meats and cheeses and butters and actually all processed foods that are out there have profound amounts of, we're talking about some foods have 4,000 to 8,000 as much omega-6 to omega-3. We weren't like that.
So you'll never be able to correct that ratio. The only way is to eliminate those foods. And by going whole food plant-based, you're getting rid of a lot of those nasty omega-6s that you don't want.
And the benefit is exponential. You're reducing the harm fast, rapidly. And this rate-limiting inflammatory and... So let's talk about omega-6, omega-3 quickly. So these are not unnatural pathways. Your body needs omega-6. Your body needs omega-3. One, and of course that's simplification, but omega-6 is the pro-inflammatory, pro-coagulation pathway. You need clotting, and you need inflammation. And omega-3 is the opposite. As it happens that as we get older, we need more anti-inflammatory because there becomes a chronic process of inflammation, which we have to counter.
Right.
And actually a baseline higher than normal. And the fact that our diets have changed. So now we have much more pro-inflammatory, pro-coagulation. That's why we have more strokes. That's why we have more inflammatory diseases, including autoimmune diseases. So if you don't lower the inflammatory pathway, you can pump this up. First of all, it won't go through.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Right. All right, let me throw this one at you. The brain is made up of fat. It thus needs lots of fat in the diet, saturated fat, and also cholesterol.
That drives me
I
crazy.
hear this one a lot. So walk us through this one.
That drives me crazy. But I think if you look at the structure of the brain, yes, the brain is made out of a lot of fat. The numbers vary. They say, 60%, 70% fat, but that calculation doesn't really separate the amount of fluids that are in the brain too. So it's actually less than 60%, but we'll leave that alone. The important thing to remember is that fats actually don't cross big molecules of fat like cholesterol and saturated fats. They actually can't cross through the blood-brain barrier, which are these tight junctions between cells in the endothelium of the cells that allow specific things to go in and specific things to come out. So the fat that is in the brain is structural fat. The only fats that are needed by the fat on a daily basis, by the brain on a daily basis, are omega-3 fatty acids. And those are small enough to actually go, be used, and that's basically it. The rest is just structural fat, and it's maintained by all the other micronutrients and by all the other food elements that we consume. So we don't need cholesterol for our brain to maintain its function at all.
Even under the worst circumstances, your liver and your body makes enough of the rest of the fat for the brain if it needs it.
Great.
It's not a problem. And the brain as well.
Any excess actually just gets metabolized, or they sit on your arteries and they start the process of just plaque formation, unfortunately.
So nothing to that one.
No, not at all.
Right. And talk about saturated fat more broadly in terms of brain health. I mean, look, there are these crazy diet wars going on right now.
Yeah.
Everybody's, planting their flag in various corners of the internet. We've got the carnivores and we've got the keto people. And, I see this all the time. Like keto people will say, I adopted a ketogenic diet. I can focus better. My brain is working better. I'm able to work longer in a more productive way than I was able to previously. Of course, that's anecdotal. But there's a lot of people who feel pretty strongly about this. So speak to this a little bit.
I think that they do feel more focused, and I believe them. I think that short term, they actually do better cognitively. Not better than any other diet, but they do better than what their baseline would have been. And that's why, but long term, there's no data. I mean, if you look at ketogenic diet data, there's nothing more than 6 months, nothing meaningful longer than 6 months. Ketogenic diet came from our field, neurology, where children with a particular type of seizure, which were not controlled by multiple medications, they were put in a shock state to control seizures. Why would we think that that's representative of a brain that's not undergoing shock? They're changing the acidic state of the brain so that the seizure is stopped. That's not representative. And then the other thing is, how long can you maintain that under normal circumstances? These children were kept in special wards or with special diets, maintaining a ketogenic diet, a true ketogenic diet. And I can tell you,
it's a lot harder than maintaining a whole food plant-based diet.
It's crazy difficult.
It's very difficult.
Most of the people that say that they're on ketogenic diet, they've never achieved ketosis. They're just eating more meat, and that they call that ketogenic diet. It's much harder than that. So short term, they do better. They do very well with glucose and insulin resistance. They do well as far as focus, and they even do some better with certain cognitive testing, which has been done short term. But nothing has been shown long term. There are no populations that have lived this life that can give you long term benefit. The one population, which is these seizure patients, have had multiple medical problems, side effects as a result of it. So we're open. We're absolutely open because there are plant-based versions of ketogenic diet. So we're open to see if long-term anybody can show evidence, but nothing so far.
Right. But the brain runs on glucose.
Brain runs on glucose.
And so on a ketogenic diet, you're depriving it of glucose and it's being forced to run on ketones.
Correct.
Correct? So is there some scientific sensibility of how the brain functions on ketones versus glucose?
Well, the analogy, you want to tell them the analogy?
Well, go ahead. You tell your analogy.
I'll let you tell this.
I'll do the nicer part.
Okay. I call ketogenic diet as of now, it might be pejorative, but almost like a cheating on your wife kind of a thing. So
How dare you?
I know. I mean, terrible. But so glucose is the main molecule that the cell requires. If there's
Preferred fuel.
Preferred fuel. We did a study in Haynes, one of the largest databases, looking at even insulin resistance, not the diabetics. We took them out and looked at insulin. They had lower cognitive state. So insulin resistance is what we're looking at. If you have too much glucose with food that rapidly rises glucose, what happens is the cell notices that there's too much of this. And actually the receptors go in. So the analogy I give is like somebody's coming as a suitor for your son or daughter, and they knock at the door, and there are too many people. The door just closes, it comes out. But if it's accepted, if it's the right amount of glucose, the door opens, then it has to go to the father, to the mother. This is an old-fashioned story.
Right.
Yeah, but it's okay. Well, and uncle, and there's a huge family there that you have to go. Glucose has to do a lot of work to ultimately get to the mitochondria. Imagine what mitochondria is. So it has a lot of work to do. 6, 7, 10 cycles of processing. First of all, it actually has to get through the blood-brain barrier, through an active transport. A lot of work. And that is designed to be like that. It's evolutionary designed to go through this hard work for glucose to get into the cell and be functional, because that's how it manages it long term. Now let's look at ketone bodies. They're small molecules. They're cheating. They're going right through the window and right into the mitochondria, skipping all the steps.
Yeah, don't have to deal with dad and
none of that
crazy
stuff.
uncle.
Initially, a lot of energy, a lot of fun, a lot of other stuff. This analogy always goes awry, but long term, it's you feel so. Ketone bodies might work short term because it's a quick burst,
Right.
even for the mitochondria. But where does in the biochemistry textbooks or any biochemical process does it say that doing the quick thing in the biochemical processes is long-term benefit? From my reading and Ayesha's reading and our research in molecular pathways, there's no evidence that anything that's short-term like that is going to be beneficial long-term.
Like you said, it's under a shock state. So and most of the studies that have been done on ketone bodies have been done in individuals who have had advanced Alzheimer's disease. And at that stage, there's a lot of damage that has already been done. There's the structural damage, vascular damage. And so ketone bodies act as an alternative fuel, right? So the cells probably don't have the opportunity to use glucose as a fuel, but ketones that don't require all these steps that Dean mentioned, they don't have to go through it, and they go right into the cell. And initially, there may be some improvement in their cognitive skills and in their neuropsychological scores. But long term, I think the only study that we have is a feasibility study that was less than 6 months. And that's basically it. So we don't have any long-term results. And if we do, I'll be excited to actually read about it, and because it sounds very promising. We just don't have the data yet.
Is it not an emergency state for the body? It's like a survival mechanism that evolved over millennia to keep a human being alive if they were deprived of food for a certain period of time, right? So in that sense, your physiology is in crisis. Is there a downstream impact on your neurological functioning? Like, are you in a sort of sympathetic nervous system state of high alert when that's going on?
Right.
We think so. I think it's a survival state. That's why survival states are short-term states. That's why, when we talk about stress, it's a short-term beneficial state that now has become chronic.
Right.
We keep missing the evolutionary flaw here. We keep addressing what's short-term benefit and think that that's long-term benefit. It's not. So we think that at least biochemically, even evidentially, we're looking at evidence from all the studies. There's no evidence at this point that this is a magical cure for dementia or Alzheimer's or any of these things. It's just a short-term survival that long-term we think has consequences.
Right. Rather than climbing in the window, how about this analogy? It's sort of like pulling an all-nighter, and you're gonna get away with the grade on the test, but a month later, you're not going to remember anything.
I can say that story much better than my story in many circles.
So So let's look at the foods that are beneficial. Like when you look at the plant kingdom, what stands out? I know we want to stay away from quote unquote superfoods, but some foods are better than others. Like what should people focus on who are trying to enhance their brain health?
Yeah, I think if I had to give a quick version of what's out there as far as data is concerned, consumption of green leafy vegetables, for example, seems to be very helpful. And it's like unanimous results that you see across different studies. Berries, such as blueberries and strawberries, they stand out, whether it's the MIND diet or the Mediterranean diet or even in the Adventist Health Study, because these are foods that have the highest amount of anti-inflammatories. Spices like turmeric. We actually wrote a paper when we were in Cedars-Sinai where we gave our patients high doses of turmeric, and turmeric seems to have the curcumin part of it is a very potent anti-inflammatory, and it seems to bind with amyloid, which is the bad protein associated with Alzheimer's disease, and it removes it.
Oh, wow.
And we measured the amount of amyloid, the amyloid load in retina, and after giving them high amounts of turmeric, we actually saw the turmeric binding to the amyloid in the retina, which is really, really interesting, and we're learning more about it as we speak. So high fiber green leafy vegetables and berries and spices, especially turmeric, seems to be on the top.
Chia and flaxseed.
Chia and flaxseed, which are amazing sources of plant-based omega-3 fatty acids, hemp seeds, nuts like walnuts, whole grains. They seem to have the right kind of micronutrients, whether it's thiamine or riboflavin or folic acid, bound beautifully synergistically, supporting each other's absorbance and bioavailability. They all tend to reduce the risk for Alzheimer's disease. And we have studies that have looked at individual foods and risk of Alzheimer's disease and the combination thereof too.
Are there any plant foods to avoid?
I would say the plant foods to avoid seems to be coconut oil. I know that again is a controversial area, and a lot of people are just,
a lot of people
love
are
coconut.
Right now.
I know. I'm sorry, but I love.
Well, that
coconut.
used to be the thing: coconut oil for brain health.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know. And unfortunately, the data was pretty flawed when it came out. It was based on a couple of case studies, and as it happened, somebody gave their loved ones some coconut oil and they seemed to improve, but then there was no long-term follow-up. But coconut oil, and I'm happy to say that there's consensus on it. And, as a scientist, I want to look at different sources of data, whether it's clinical trials, whether it's epidemiological, whether it's case series, and there's consensus between different scientists and doctors and physicians that coconut oil seems to increase our bad cholesterol, LDL, which can result into vascular damage. And the reason being is because coconut oil is one of the few plant oils that is more than 90% saturated fat. And so is palm oil.
And the little nuance to that is the MCT, medium chain triglycerides. That has to be studied, and we're open to that. I mean, we think that if those studies come back and show some benefit, we would be more than happy, because we need anything that's out there that's going to help. So far, no data, no tangible data.
But with coconut oil, doesn't that LDL saturated fat component, isn't it fairly easily converted to like linoleic acid, which makes it more available as an energy source as opposed to being stored?
It could, but reality is that number, so that's a mechanism. Actually, that mechanism exists for a lot of saturated fats. But reality is that when the studies are done over and over again, what they see is when people consume coconut oil, it is actually the atherogenic and inflammatory component that predominates.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It is a processed food anyway. So in the context of talking about whole food plant-based diet, it's not even really part of that conversation anyway. But you did shift gears with olive oil to some regard.
Here's talk about controversial.
Yeah.
We were actually ostracized by some communities for this, which I'd never thought that.
There's a heated debate going on.
Yes.
People are very strong opinions about this.
It's so funny. We worked in Afghanistan and were ostracized by Taliban. So some plant-based people ostracizing us doesn't scare us too much. But so please ostracize us away.
They're not as well armed.
Not as well armed. And so much lovelier people anyway. So reality is we're open to data. It's not about dogma. There are a couple of lines of argument. And it's not always because we looked at Mediterranean diet. We're actually in the middle of doing a meta-analysis. The data is, again, trend. And nutrition data is tough. So you have to go with trends and multiple domains of trends. And it appears that some, and here's another controversial term, some, olive oil seems to help with cognition, seems to help with health in general, and specifically EVO, extra virgin olive oil. And then the quantity is controversial, how much. We think that there is a point of excess. So we say use as minimal as possible just to help with both digestion and with food. But we just wanted to open up the realm, even though we might make people angry. That's okay. That's our life. But if its data shows this way, we got to start talking about it. And at the same time, when we go to these churches and faith communities, which another one of our projects is a women-centered faith-based community brain initiative in African-American churches, where
disproportionately impacted by Alzheimer's.
And also, more importantly, as Ayesha's finished getting her PhD in women's leadership, focusing on women in health is the most effective money spent in health. So if you're going to bring a brain health initiative, it should be around women. So especially African-American women or Black women and their communities. But we see, and if we go to these communities and Hispanic communities and other communities in Appalachia or Pittsburgh, where I come from, and say, no meat, no cheese, no butter, no salt, no sugar, no fat, no oil, no Dean.
Right. So you're going to have a little bit of an adherence problem.
Absolutely. Now, that doesn't speak to the science, and I spoke already to the science that there seems to be some trend that's positive. Olive oil is fine, especially cardiovascular data. But it does speak also to compliance. And since we work in the communities and we're not doing contrived 100% studies in a lab, we think that's as important.
Well, compliance is everything. If you don't have compliance, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
But you have to be careful, right? Because you don't want to veer too far towards compliance. Then you're the practitioner who's like, I'm not going to tell them about lifestyle because they're not going to do it.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. It's a balancing act. So we say what's the optimal, especially people who have, so complexity is, somebody said, I think somebody we know said that the entire problem we have in this world is, I think Dr. Katz, is about people not being comfortable with complexity. There's a complexity in this. Yeah. And the complexity is we have to worry about adherence, but at the same time, we have to say what the truth is. And here's another layer of complexity. If somebody has a 4-vessel disease, we say go all the way, no fat, because the data is there, that if you have 4-vessel arterial disease, you might as well go all the way as opposed to, so there's a bit of complexity there.
Right. People don't like that.
I know.
It's hard. The truth, the truth will set you free. You have to be able to make room for nuance now more than ever. Things are so crazy out there. And the only way to do that is to have, conversations like this. It's not going to happen on Twitter. And it's tricky. And it's people's identities are wrapped up in these ideas. And people don't like to be challenged with that because it threatens, it's almost like cognitive decline, like you're like my sense of who I am is being pulled out from underneath me, and emotionally it's very difficult.
Right.
One of the people we admire greatly, we're not going to name names, don't worry, actually said they would not endorse our book, even though we're in the communities by the thousands, helping thousands of people with a whole food plant-based diet, just because we say add a little bit of olive oil.
Yeah, everything gets more and more specialized. It used to just be vegetarianism, and then it's vegan and vegetarianism, and then within those categories, there's more and more silos until there's just one person left in each one of the silos, and nobody can talk. Everybody's got their own news feed, and we can't communicate with each other anymore. I mean, that's where this is headed.
It is.
It's sad.
Ayesha, how many PhDs do you need?
No, I feel so lucky. Well, first of all, I have this amazing partner that, just allows me to experience life in its fullest. And, so I have a master's in clinical research, and I went to medical school, and I've worked in clinics, and I got a fellowship in vascular neurology. But the more I am in this field, I realize that if we don't focus on the human component, it's meaningless. Meaningless. And having had the privilege of working in the communities, meaning going there, sitting down with them, listening to them, working in the community clinic where you have these lovely people coming in and telling you, like, Doc, I know this is important. I just can't do it right now. I just can't do it because of this. Mm-hmm. You can't really talk to a woman who has 2 jobs, is divorced, has 4 or 5 children to take care of, has a parent with dementia that she takes care of, has tremendous amount of stress because of the situation in the world, and tell them, just meditate every day. Meditation is really good for your brain. That is such an elitist statement. That is such a flawed approach to health. And so what do you do to make yourself available, and what do you do to create an environment in their communities where they can have access to health and wellness in their comfort and their comfort zones? And so having worked with different individuals, and especially in the faith-based communities, the one thing Dean and I have noticed, and this actually comes from our work in Afghanistan as well, where we've noticed that if we invest in the women in those communities, you've actually invested in the families and in the communities, because women are the best representatives of that unit in the community. And when you look at different models of success in the world, one of them that came from Dr. Yunus, who was the Nobel Peace Prize laureate. He's the father of microcredits, where he, essentially helped women and their small businesses. And he made some profound statement. He said, when you help women, you actually help families and you help change that society, because no disrespect to men, I love you guys, but women know how to invest in their families and in their units. And so I'm pursuing this PhD in women's leadership because we believe that if women are ambassadors of brain health and mental health, I think it's a game changer. And we've seen that. We've seen that in Afghanistan, and Dean doesn't talk about that, but one of the things that is such a profound story in our life was when I'm going to say that story for you. When he was working for the World Bank, he was in Afghanistan and he was running the Ministry of Health. And one of the challenges was to make health available for all these provinces and villages that were away from the capital. And there are not a lot of hospitals there. I think we learned more about public health there than any course at Columbia, any course at NIH and UCSD and Loma Linda University combined together. So knowing the politics and the bureaucracy, what Dean did was essentially a social jujitsu, where he created the establishment to train 20,000 girls who were, went to school up to 6th grade, because after that, they usually, there's no education available for girls in the provinces. And so he took 6th grade educated girls and he wanted to train them in just basic health care. How to give ampicillin when somebody has upper respiratory infection, how to create oral rehydration solution, which is, 1 liter of boiling water, 1 fist of sugar, and a pinch of salt, because 1 in 5, children under the age of 5 die from easily preventable diarrhea in those countries. And to give them that oral rehydration solution, you've actually saved a life. Or to tell the difference between spotting and bleeding in a pregnant woman, because the hospital ride is about 5 days on a donkey ride. Right? So just basic things. And so there was a lot of pushback initially about this project. They said, nope, you're not going to take our girls and educate them. This is against our faith, against our culture and tradition. And Dean said, no. This is going to be done in your communities and in your villages. And so they accepted it. And that was a beautiful move, because they created mud huts, clinics for these girls in a very prominent place with a flag on it. And it was just a very basic place with a chair and a table and maybe a bed sheet as a curtain, with a small little bed for the midwife or the nurses nurses and midwifery program, to examine patients. And guess who would get sick after a few days? The men would get sick too, right? And there would be that girl, and she would be the community doctor. And suddenly you've completely flipped the relationships.
Yeah, that just fucks up their whole mindset of the whole thing.
So the jujitsu here is you don't have to confront cultural paradigms. You jujitsu around it. And with most of healthcare, thank you so much for telling that story.
That's amazing, by the way, incredible.
We wrote a paper together. And,
it's actually in Lancet.
Oh, wow.
How to apply it to other communities.
Right.
And if we do that, not so much jujitsu, but use the resources of the community to build this paradigm around women. I mean, your wife, the power. We know her.
What a human she
Ayesha.
is. That's
and also they're the leaders. And even in those Taliban infested places, they do all the yelling and jumping around. The men do. But who runs the households?
Right, they're making the decisions about.
They're making decisions.
What
and
people
every
are doing,
community
what they're
that's the
eating.
case.
Yeah.
Women are the leaders. Women are actually the leaders. And we can build a whole healthcare system, brain health initiative around women. So that's been our work for the last two and a half years.
Right.
Yeah. So applying that template, here in the United States, going into these communities, trying to pull some, tweaked version of that jujitsu maneuver to, empower these women, enlist them in this cause, and in turn have them help create structures that trickle down into their families.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, so that's the goal, and it's been an amazing journey. Just experiencing that firsthand to see how wonderful of a communicator a woman can be, and how easy it is for others to listen to a woman who is a sister, a mother, an individual in the community, coming from a very empathic and a loving place, but at the same time from a very powerful place. I'm just so excited to be in that area.
Yeah, there's no bounds to the upside of that. I think, right?
That's right.
Well, let's talk about the new book. I mean, you guys wrote this amazing book, The Alzheimer's Solution, that came out a couple of years ago. That's what brought you onto the show back then, which is basically an incredible primer on all the research that you've done, case studies, your work with your patients in terms of implementing lifestyle interference to interrupt this brain dementia issue that is mushroom clouding in our society. But the new book, the 30-day Alzheimer's Solution, right, is more of a tactile, very easy to use guide for how to kind of, implement these tools into your daily life using this neuro paradigm of, it's basically mostly nutrition focused. You talk about the other stuff, but it takes you through a program. It gives you kind of tools for how to make these changes in your life. And then you have all of these beautiful recipes to try to make it as appealing and delicious and easy for people to do as possible. So it's great. I love it. My only complaint is that it was a digital version, and I don't have the book yet, but it's coming out soon. So talk a little bit about why you decided to write this book and what your plan for it is.
Thanks, Rich. That's very kind of you, and we'll definitely get you a copy. I think the pandemic slowed down everything, but we're very proud of it. It was difficult to put our experiences in a way where it's translational and palatable, pardon the pun. But we wanted to focus in on the how part of brain health. The first book was essentially the why and a lot of science, but the applicability part has been expanded in this book. And, the title, The 30-Day, was a little uncomfortable initially. Like, what does that even mean? Does it mean that in 30 days I'm going to have the best brain? No, but I think it's a 30-day journey or a plan towards that direction. And we're just really excited. And I think one of the reasons I went to cooking school after going to fellowship was just because of the passion that I have for application of all the science and knowledge that we have already.
One of the key things in behavior change is process. A lot of times people get focused on goals, and goals fail us because once you reach, as I said, you feel anticlimactic, and then what? It's process that's important. Systems have to be established. So the 30 days is attempting, and I never want to do hyperbole, and is attempting to create an environment for systems. In fact, with the book, for those who sign up early, this is a marketing tool, but they get
You get all kinds of bells and whistles. I saw that.
My goodness, I never thought that at an IH I would be doing this stuff, but in any case, but
turned into a marketer.
But nonetheless, but it is actually, I think it's helpful. We are giving people. By the way, we said if you buy the book early, you get access, but it's actually on our system. You don't have to buy the book. You can get access to a 30-day course that starts at 1st of April up to the end, where we have sleep doctors, stress doctors, nutritionists, lots of data and equipment and cooking sessions and courses, where Ayesha, that's for free, by the way, takes them with the book through this process for a month, not with the hopes that at the end they come out completely different, but for them to be familiar with possibilities of where the changes, the micro changes can take place. You've spoken to an amazing, the Atomic Habits.
James Clear.
James Clear.
Yeah. I love the book.
Great
I mean, I've read a
conversation.
lot of books.
Yeah.
It's those little incremental successes that change into habits, which change into then culture. So this month is about going through this process with brain and mind. Sorry, that there's another one that came out, that actually takes them through. And they're hopefully by the end of it, they have enough of these little micro habits that becomes a process, individualized, and habits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you broke it all down. And you didn't sugarcoat it either. You're like, look, this is going to be hard. If you're going to get off cheese, it's going to be uncomfortable. Like, you're not trying to say it's all going to be awesome all the time. Like, it's making any kind of change is difficult. And this is no different, but what you find on the other side is worth it. And you give the right amount of like encouragement, and you couch motivation in the right context. And I appreciated that as well. But you paint with a broad brush so that, anybody can pick this up and get their head around what the right path is.
That was the goal. That was the goal for, we basically wrote this for our caregivers and the patients and everybody that's been touched by Alzheimer's. And I know the cover says Alzheimer's, but it's essentially brain health in general and cognitive decline, which a lot more people are experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to appeal to a young person to make changes in their life because they might get Alzheimer's. Like, talk about a motivation problem.
Yes.
It's like, but if you instead rephrase it as cognitive enhancement or some sort of brain hack or something like that, then suddenly you get young people's attention.
Absolutely.
And you get them interested in taking care of their brains so that they don't fall prey to this later in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's important to say it that way.
Yeah.
Right.
And for us, we have the Healthy Minds Initiative, which is a non-for-profit where our goal is, hopefully, that we can promulgate and spread this concept of coaching, women-centered coaching throughout the country. And whatever comes out of this book goes towards that effort. Whoever wants to help us out goes towards that effort. And I think it's a worthwhile endeavor with Ayesha in the lead, and I'm the driver.
Oh, we're a team.
Wow. So all proceeds from the book go to the nonprofit.
All of it.
Fantastic.
All the profits.
Yeah. And that nonprofit, Healthy Minds Initiative, is very involved in what you're doing in Redondo, where you live right now. But the idea, much like Blue Zones, is to kind of scale this and model it for other cities and communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
The Beach Cities Health District is where our flagship Healthy Minds Initiative study is going on. We have one in Arizona, in South Carolina, and we're expanding it in other states as well. Cool. And we're basically training coaches who can be brain health representatives and ambassadors in their community and just move it forward.
Right. Awesome. Well, we got to land this plane, but I got two more things I want to ask you before I let you go. The first is, obviously, there's so much more research that needs to get done in terms of brain health and also nutrition and how lifestyle impacts brain health. If you had your druthers, like, what is the study that you would set up? Like, what is the big study that's missing right now? Like, forget about cost. Just how would you do it? What would it look at?
First of all, it would be a little longer term. It would be at least 3 to 5 years. And it would actually have imaging, and it would be community-based. That seems contradictory, like this technology, but it would be community-based. Because if just like mouse models that work, 400 mouse models for Alzheimer's worked. 0 worked on humans. The same way, these little contrived 100%, 200% studies on 6 months, 7 months means nothing. If we don't do it in larger populations and we don't get good markers of cognition, which is neuropsychological testing, biomarkers, and imaging that shows this change over time, it's meaningless because you will get every diet will come up with a paper saying, look at my study, 6 months, look at my study. There will be many of them, documentaries and everything put together. But we need a larger study for going forward. So we're doing the data capture in our national, we'll take care of the funding there. We don't have the funding for imaging. We don't have the funding for blood tests. And the regular funding sources don't seem to get it. They're not adjusting, saying, look, we'll take care of the educational component. We'll take care of the resources, the technology. We'll take care of all of that. But we need some help with the biomarkers and imaging component. And we can have the best study for cognition. And then we will have studies that will look at, because it's a large population, we'll know data on ketogenic, we'll know data on plant-based, whole food, we will know data on omnivore or even pescatarian. That would be the optimal study that would be out there.
So essentially a massive population study, community-based study of where people would be self-reporting or...
We have the methods of collecting data, not on a once-a-year basis where the food frequency questions are, but actually on a monthly or weekly basis. We have the tools now. We're actually using that in beach cities, using iPads and computers. We can collect the data on as far as that's concerned. We have the tools as far as collecting sophisticated cognitive information on the computers, and we'll take care of all of that. So those 2 big components. And as far as teaching them using Zoom, for us, Zoom was now, actually yesterday, we had a Zoom session with our teaching population of over 100 people. So that's even taken care of. We'll take care of the education component on a weekly basis and the coaching training. The only thing is needed is that biomarker funding that would really help us out because there's bigger costs we've taken care of.
Okay, last question. I can't remember whether I asked you guys this last time you were here. If I did, I'm going to ask you again. I don't remember what you said anyway. If you woke up tomorrow and realized you'd been appointed as Surgeon General of the United States, and given the kind of metastasizing Alzheimer's problem, like this, apocalyptic number of people, tripling by 2050, what kind of policies would you try to implement or legislative changes would you be thinking about that could move us in the right direction as a nation?
Ooh, that's a tough one. You want to go first?
Okay.
Well, I would say more resources for communities about managing their lifestyle. I think most of the funding goes into very specific molecular datas. I think less is being focused on individuals in the communities, and that's where I would focus, whether it's changing lifestyle with behavior models, whether it's nutrition education, whether it's exercise education, and fitting it according to their resources. That would be the place to focus on.
I fully agree.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about mind diet at one point, which is not an optimal diet. Even the people, the main PI passed away recently.
Martha Morris.
And even she said it's not the optimal diet. But yet 53% reduction in Alzheimer's. And I'm sure that the same number would apply, if not more, for stroke and everything with this mind diet. So why wouldn't we invest at all in this kind of an approach? And especially in the community-based model. So I fully agree with Ayesha. That would be the investment.
Yeah, it seems like more local-based medicine, an overhaul of healthcare to sort of reconfigure it around prevention as opposed to diagnosis and prescribing people.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we need a lot of changes, don't we?
We do.
But you guys are playing a huge role in reversing this tide, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. You're truly saving lives, and it's admirable. And I wish you all the best. It's amazing what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you for helping us disperse the message. Yeah. I mean, this is truly important.
Anything to help you guys out, anytime, reach out. Thank you. That was amazing. Appreciate you guys.
Appreciate you.
The new book is called The 30-Day Alzheimer's Solution.
That's
it's
right.
available March 23rd.
Correct.
That's pub date, right?
Yes, it is.
Practical guide to help you wrap your head around everything that we talked about today, and more importantly, implement those changes into your life. If you want to dive deep into the science and geek out on all of that, I would highly recommend picking up The Alzheimer's Solution, their first book. It's amazing. You can find these guys at Team Sherzai on the internets.
That's right.
And anything else? Anywhere else to point people? Is there a website for your nonprofit if people want to learn more about that?
Healthymindsinitiative.org. Yes, cool. Healthymindsinitiative.org. And they can contact us. And if they're interested in volunteering or having us come to their communities, we would be happy to do that.
Awesome. All right. And you guys are welcome here anytime. Come
Thank
back
you,
and talk to
Rich.
me again, okay?
Thank you so
you.
much.
All right.
Thank you.
Peace.
Peace.
Plants.